All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Budget Director Zach Jackson. You can hold your applause. Thank you. And since I have no other useful skills, I will be serving as the MC, the Master of Ceremonies for today's festivities. It is my distinct privilege, first of all, to welcome you to our first and maybe one of many financial and risk management summits. And with that, but by show of hands, I'm just curious, how many of you were invited via email? Email was your way of hearing about this. How many of you, I'm just curious, heard about it via word of mouth as opposed to email? Okay, all right, just want to, we did miss a few people. Okay, well, with that said, first thing off, I want to introduce a man that needs no introduction. But I'll do it anyway. Chris Johnston, OMB Director.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here with us today, and want to thank you for taking time out and committing to learning about internal controls and financial management circulars. I also want to thank you for everything that you do. I know that sounds a little sappy, but your commitment to public service is greatly appreciated. I also want to thank the staff of the State Budget Agency and the State Board of Accounts who have collaborated significantly and so well together to get us to this point. And as Zach mentioned, I think this is just the start of an ongoing discussion of where we want to go on this topic. As you know, state government is complex, and that complexity just continues to grow every year. The range of business units, agencies, and departments that make up state government provide a really vast array of services, some by agencies with thousands of people and others with just only a handful of staff. We're building roads, we're educating kids, we're providing child welfare services. There's human health, there's animal health. And then even if you just think about one discipline in the regulatory environment, I need a license. Well, do you need a driver's license? Do you need a fishing license? Do you need a license to go to work, right? We have over 10% of the adult population in Indiana, 600,000 people require a license to work in their chosen profession. And just as a reminder, this has been sort of ingrained in me in my years of public service. These programs and services are funded by taxes and fees that people are required to pay. A former governor used to call it coercion. These are not voluntary transactions. People have to pay their taxes. And it's our responsibility to develop and maintain the confidence and trust across a wide range of stakeholders and interested parties and our customers. That trust is earned by delivering on expectations of managing or maximizing those taxes and fees for the purpose in which they were collected. During my time in state government, I've gathered a small collection of quotes, and in preparing for today, I was reminded how many of them actually go back to the founding of our country. And it just as a reminder that many of these issues have been around for hundreds of years, right? The human interaction. In one of them, I thought none of them would apply to what we're talking about here, financial management, internal controls. But it goes back to the confidence and trust we were talking about of what we want to develop. In Alexander Hamilton, in one of the Federalist Papers, in the forming of our federal government and the relationship with state governments, was trying to capture how do you determine the satisfaction or the acceptance of citizens with their government? And I'll quote, "I believe it may be laid down as a general rule that their confidence in and obedience to a government will commonly be apportioned to the goodness or badness of its administration. How well do you deliver the services? What sort of confidence and faith do you put in the citizens that, again, are paying these taxes and fees? So I'm assuming we all want to be on the goodness side of the ledger. And so with that, what is our role as financial managers? It's efficiency, it's effectiveness. It's not flashy. We have a lot of people that work on policy and develop new programs, but it's what we do day in and day out that make government work. A great program can't make an impact unless it's effectively managed and can deliver those services, and that includes financial management. Our topics today are the financial management circulars that were issued in January, focusing on developing an internal control environment. We've gone too long, and maybe it's evidenced by being here today. We've gone too long without having this type of gathering and having this discussion. These financial management circulars will build the environment and create the tools to earn and preserve that level of trust and confidence that I spoke of. What you'll find is we will not have all the answers today. In fact, I see this as a kickoff, as Zach mentioned, and the start of an ongoing discussion and continuous learning and improvement process. So what I'd like to do is just cover what you're going to hear a little bit at a very high level, the financial management circulars. So the first one is 6.1, talking about internal control standards in the environment. And it really talks about what internal controls, why internal controls are needed, the elements that make up a sound internal control environment, how do we sustain that environment, and then also it talks about the assignment of duties and responsibilities within our respective organizations. I'd like to jump ahead. Let's skip 6.2 and go to 6.3, the internal audit function, and I'm sure that's gained a lot of attention and discussion in your shops. We currently, by statute, have 3 agencies with an internal audit function: the Department of Revenue, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and the Family and Social Services Administration. The financial management circular outlines the criteria in which the requirements for an internal audit function trigger that. And it's based on the size of the budget, the number of employees, and the level of cash processing. I think we ought to take a little bit, and there's certain dates in there. And so what I want to do is really think about those parameters. There's probably a subset or a dozen of those agencies which should be working towards establishing a formal internal audit function. But I think because we've got 3 really good agencies that have tried to tackle this already, and I would like to develop a working group with the pool of agencies that I think are a subset of what those criteria identify, and really work with the State Board of Accounts, work with these 3 other internal audit functions, and take what they have learned over the last several years as to avoid making the same mistakes or avoid pitfalls along the way of developing that internal audit committee. I think there's also opportunities for a shared services model. And so let's just say it's a dozen agencies that really should have a formal internal audit function. I think there's the next band. It doesn't mean that we don't have an internal audit function or activities that are performed by all our agencies, but there's probably a band of that next tier in terms of complexity of agencies, the size of the agency, in which there could be a shared services model of which the agency participates in internal audit. And we're having internal discussions about that. I think there also needs to be a monitoring function as well, not rigid, but a form of, if you've ever been in the private sector or private company, have an internal audit group. And it could be representatives from the State Board of Accounts, OMB, maybe an ad hoc person, maybe the governor's office, right? The auditor's office. But there should be an audit committee so that it's just not, it's periodically monitored. We as managers have a responsibility to do that. So let's go back to what a lot of the discussion is going to be about today, 6.2, the risk self-assessment. Positive change frequently starts with a critical look at where we are today. And by critical, I don't mean condemning. Not we're creating a list of things that are good and things that are bad, but that we're taking an honest look of our own operations. There'll be several modules through this risk self-assessment. We're going to start with the finance area. One of those, this ties back to the standards of internal audit. I'm just going to use this as an example. Segregation of duties. Can someone give me a definition of what segregation of duties is? Ed? Right. Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. There's not sole control over the entire life of a transaction, right? There's intake, there's receiving, there's recording, there's approval of the transactions. But if I were out there, I'd be going, well, Ed, Department of Revenue has 600 people. Of course you can have you can figure out segregation of duties. What happens when I only have 5 people or 10 people in my agency? It doesn't mean that we still don't have that self-assessment that says, I may have a segregation of duties problem, but what am I going to do to mitigate that issue? That's a very proper response. It's what are the steps we're going to put in place that might mitigate those risks by not having just absolute segregation of duties. So we're going to do a lot of these risk assessments. That's going to be the foundation, I think, that is going to inform the long-term internal audit functions that we'll be developing. And the risk assessments, besides answering the questions, we should also be looking at the future. What could be happening out there that's going to change my risk profile? And so do we need to start making plans for that? Because this feeds back into tying into the rest of your management team of identifying these things. The other thing that in a previous life, I worked on a lot of program evaluation. It certainly helps on the design of new programs. What are the internal controls that are needed when we're designing a new program? Because I don't think anyone would disagree that all programs are well-intentioned. But you can have the most well-intentioned program that performs poorly because we didn't really think about the design up front while that law was being passed or that policy was being developed. So design design of new programs should also incorporate the discussion of internal controls. So when we go through this risk assessment process, we at OMB, we're going to look at the trends. We're going to look for opportunities where there's common areas of potential weakness. And again, that sounds like such a harsh word, but opportunities where we might be able to have focused training to address some of the issues that we may see in many agencies or several agencies across state government. There's also an opportunity for the sharing of best practices. We might go back to segregation of duties. An agency may be small and struggling with segregation of duties, but maybe there's some agency of similar size and complexity that has figured it out or has good mitigating controls. So that's an opportunity where we in OMB and with the State Board of Accounts can work at trying to address a lot of these issues. Finally, some topics that are top of mind for me. Yesterday, we had our entrance conference for the fiscal year 22 audit. This is the engagement letter with the State Board of Accounts, and Auditor Klutz and I participated in that. The engagement letter actually, it was very timely because it reminded me, because it sets out both what the responsibilities are of the State Board of Accounts, but also management's responsibilities. And I'd just like to touch on a couple of those. Management's responsible for designing, implementing, and maintaining internal controls. The State Board of Accounts is going to report on those internal controls related to the financial statements and compliance with law, as well as major federal programs, the single audit, which have grown in significance. Many of you in the auditorium today have seen the amount of federal funds really skyrocket in your operation. Manny is going to, or excuse me, in the second, Manny was going to talk about this, but one area that was highlighted that we've already started working on is management. This is another requirement. Management is responsible for establishing and maintaining a process for tracking the status of audit findings and recommendations. And I would include corrective action plans in that. So that's going to be a tool that is initiated out of the Office of Management and Budget, and that will work with you to have periodic check-ins of how your corrective action plans are going. And it's one of those things also is I'm not making, a valid answer is I'm not making the progress that I would like. Can someone help me? And we're here to help address those issues where you might be struggling to implement those corrective action plans. Finally, just like to reiterate, we want our taxpayers to have the confidence that the taxes that they pay are, one, needed, used appropriately, and extracting the greatest value. May not be flashing, but the managing and financial management shows that we all care. So thank you for being here today, and we look forward to working with you in the days ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris, and appreciate those historical references from our founding fathers. It reminds me of the Boston Tea Party was all about taxation without representation, and it also reminds me, Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. A lot of people think he said one if by land, two if by sea, but actually it was use 0.1 for payroll expenses and 0.2 for other operating. But with that said, it's my. Sorry, it's the best I could come up with. It's my pleasure to introduce Paul Joyce, State Examiner. Thank you.
Exactly. I was sitting here last night. I told my wife, I said, how do you make this exciting? And she's a CPA too. And she says, you're going to talk about internal controls and risk assessment. It's not going to happen. So anyhow, I am very supportive of the efforts that OMB, Budget Agency, and the Auditor State's Office is undertaking here. Chris and I have been talking about this on and off for, it's probably 16 years now. And there's not anything more important than internal controls when it comes to financial activities, especially if that's what our function is. And when we look at the internal controls, we look at strengthening those controls, supporting, this is from the Board of Accounts perspective, supporting the state's fiscal staff and solving the issues. And Chris touched that a little bit about findings, about, what the idea is, the corrective action plans. It's not about writing them. It's about how do we actually make these a productive finding and a productive conclusion. Because at the end of the day, the state definitely doesn't want to pay that money back in unallowed cost. And we don't want that either. We want good government, good transparency, good accountability. And that's what internal controls can help bring toward toward that end result. From an audit perspective, this will help more closely align the state with the transparencies, with the foundation that the accounting profession looks at for transparency and accountability. And there's basically 5 different components of internal controls. You got the control environment, and that's basically the policies and procedures that the state establishes to make sure that their products get, you know, their FNCs, their policies, their procedures, that they get followed, so they can be transparent and they can be accountable. The second part of that's risk assessment, and that's basically what we're going to start out with here today. We have control activities, we have information and communication, and the monitoring activities. And Chris touched a little bit on that, on the monitoring of when he talked about the start of the act for audit, at the end of it, following up on those findings and going through that process. All of these, the different 5 components of internal control are necessary, and they have to be included, or the system is basically, it's either broke or non-existent. And so we need to find a way to make sure that they all 5 exist and they exist together. I've went through Zach's FMCs that they issued, and I know Patrick helped write them and Manny helped write them. And they're very thorough and very well thought out. I definitely appreciate the efforts that he went through. I hope you guys can understand and appreciate the efforts that they're trying to do to help make your agencies support the state's mission and become more transparent and more accountable. Definitely, I'm very supportive that this is the very first one that of those different 5 that we're going to tackle as a group is this self-risk assessment. Chris touched a little bit about how hard self-risk assessment can be. Looking at oneself, looking at your own shop, looking at your own policies and procedures that you have in place. It's hard. It's not meant to be easy, but it's necessary to be very critical, you know, I will say very critical of yourself and of your processes when you're looking at them and you need to do it with an open mind. Most of the times we suggest an individual not do it by themselves, but utilize another person to help look at that. Sometimes you might have to, if you're a smaller agency, maybe even utilize another agency to help them. And if you still don't, definitely call the Board of Accounts. We'd be glad to help walk you through it. This is about success, so we want success in it. Chris brought up, you know, segregation of duties. And you know, we deal with this in local governments a lot. And one of the common ones is, say, a trustee where they prove the bank statements, they write the checks, they get the statements, they approve their claims. So there really is very little accountability within a trustee's office. But it doesn't mean that they can't. It means they don't have to. But what they can do is they could contact the county and say, get a hold of the county commissioner and say, have a bank statement mailed to them and have, you know, give them the reconcilement so they can create that control procedure within that township and a county that shows there can be some accountability and there can be some kind of transparency. And the same can be in a school corporation where you have a treasurer that gets a bank statement, does the reconcilement and gives it to the board. Well, the accountability part there is the bank should also be sending a bank statement to the board president. And that's just where you can take that singular thing and throw it out and bring in. But sometimes you need to think about what can that process be? And if you're sitting there just thinking about, well, I'm the only person in my office, so I have to take checks in, I have to post them, and I have to go bring them to the bank. No, you don't. There's ways we can work around that. We can work with centralized accounting. There's lots of avenues and procedures if you just ask. So it's identifying that we have a problem, identifying it as a risk when we do our self-assessment, and then let us help you find that answer out. And, you know, maybe it's, we get checks and we don't know what to do with them because they're made out to somebody else and they came back in the mail, and now what do? Well, let us help you find that right avenue rather than just say, well, we're going to stick them in a corner and we won't do anything with them. Because then, I mean, we send them out so nobody really knows that they're there. but that's really not what we want. We want to say, well, that's not right. So let's find out what that right way is. And, you know, one of the most important thing is there is not to make excuses for it, be thoughtful, be honest. And then that risk assessment can really help you out. Be honest, be objective, be frank with your answers. Don't try to sugarcoat. It's not there. It's not going to be. I think one of the most important things that, and Debbie brought this up to me to bring is every one of these should have an answer, and you should be able to explain it out. And it doesn't really matter what that answer is, because it is your perspective, and that's what we're looking for. And what is that perspective? How do you understand it? And one of the things Debbie and Susan from my office is going to do is one of the things we do for local governments is we give usually quarterly training, at least half-year training on different topics. And I know they'll be doing these and inviting you to them. And hopefully between that and the group that Chris was talking about, we can get together the right people in the room that can help us answer these questions and not be worried about, you know, okay, we got an audit, let's get slammed in the head. It's not what it's about. This is about getting it right. And, you know, when we work with you on these aren't findings that are going, well, let's run these straight to the audit team and being in a report. That's not going to be the case. This is just about finding the right way to do processes, procedures, following good, sound internal controls. And it does start with this self-risk assessment. So once again, I just want to express my appreciation to both Chris, Zach, and Tara for work, and Manny and all of the different people within these agencies that put this together to work on this, because this is an extremely important part of the success and accountability and transparency for the state. And at the end of the day, that's what we're all working for, is to make sure that what we do is transparent, what we do is accountable, and that the state is the one that benefits from those actions. So thank you, and I wish you luck. And if you have any questions, please call our office. We'd be glad to help you through any of this. Thank you.
We were prepared to start some music to play you off the stage. We couldn't get that queued up. Okay, so yeah. With that, my pleasure to introduce Auditor of Klutz, Tara Stitt, no, let me do that again. Auditor of State, Tara Klutz.
It's hard because Paul is our state auditor, but thank you, Zach. I'm Tara Klutz. I run the controller, CFO position in conjunction with the state budget agency, but Paul is actually our auditor. You guys know this, state examiner. And so I'm so thankful to be a partner in this. This is near and dear to my heart. I'm here to talk about risk assessments in everyday common language, because we all are risk assessors. We do it all the time. Sometimes we talk in language that's vague and complicated and very analytical, but I have some examples. First, if you know you are a worrier or an anxious person, please raise your hand. I'm sure that could be the worst thing to ask an anxious person or worrier. Okay. Now, if you didn't raise your hand, but you know people that would call you an anxious person or a worrier, raise your hand. Okay, a few more. So this is really for everybody, but I'm thinking about your kids, your jobs, your pet, and your relationships. Let's say, you know, I have a 17-year-old, actually I have a 19 and 26-year-old, but let's say back when one of them was 17 and my 17-year-old daughter says, hey, I'm gonna drive to my friend so-and-so's house. It's 1 a.m., it's in the middle of winter, and there's snow on the road. Okay, so many of us, even the non-worriers, will perform a risk assessment generally right there, and you're just not even thinking about it. But you're thinking about the inputs. You got a young driver. Here, it's late at night, there's road hazards, not to mention this friend, who is that friend? And if you're very skeptical, you might even wonder after they left, if you did say yes, did they ever make it to the friends, or was that ever where they were going to begin with? But those are all little things going through our minds because we're making assumptions. Some parents will just say sure and assume their daughter made it from A to B and they won't think about it again. And that's what happens in most of our daily operations. We're assuming that what we say happens, happens. And we're just assuming that. And we're never really going back to look at the inputs or the environments that those activities are taking place in. So this is kind of a way for us to kind of take a self-assessment of all of those different activities. Let's say that, yeah, that's what we're asking you to do. But I have a couple of examples. I can't believe I'm bringing this up, but I'm going to bring up payroll. Thanks for switching payroll systems with us. Your monumental effort has been noticed and appreciated, but I'm going to talk about some of the assumptions that we make every day, and all of us deal with payroll. So my office assumes that every hour submitted for every employee was actually worked or coded correctly for paid time off. Or that seems like a safe assumption. Or alternatively, the payroll person in your agency who submits that to us is assuming that every division within your agency has also submitted every hour correctly, every paid time off code correctly. And so are those safe assumptions? I'm not sure. These are some of the questions you might want to ask. Who is entering time for the employee? Does the employee have a state computer to enter that time? Does that employee have, who is approving that employee's time? Could it be the employee? Could it be a manager? Could it be somebody 100 miles away? Does the person approving have actual knowledge of the employee's work, of the employee working? Do they work in the same location? Have the employee and approver been trained on proper agency protocol? The answer to those questions will determine your confidence in the original assumptions that we made. And then also that our assumptions are that they're getting paid correctly, but what are the risks that they're not? And that's kind of what this process is. Another example may be paying agency bills. I try to come up with examples that we all have to deal with all the time. When I receive a voucher or an invoice from your agency to audit and pay, my office assumes that you've received those goods and services. And so, that seems like a safe assumption. And also, when your person submits that for me to pay, how do they know it's okay to pay? Does the employee have anything that they're checking? Do they get an email from somebody? Do they get a paper with initials on it? Does somebody call them on the phone and say, hey, we've received this, you can pay it? Or just the fact that it's sitting in their inbox, are they supposed to assume that it's okay to pay? Those are different questions that you can ask them. So you think with goods and services, we should be okay because our system requires a receiver to receive a physical good. But I put receiver in quotes because has that receiver physically inspected the thing that they were supposed to receive? Is it even in the same city? Did they get a FaceTime to see it? Did the receiver also order the item or good? Those are all questions that are going to change your level of confidence in the assumption that we've already received the goods and services before we pay it. So that's the kind of thing that we're asking you to go through. All of us make assumptions. The Department of Health makes assumptions that they're giving the right vaccine to the right people using their established processes. Department of Transportation assumes that the specs that they bid for asphalt are used in the jobs that get awarded based upon their established practices. And I bring up those two because they probably have really good established practices because a mistake would be a big deal, but it trickles down into everything we do. And so I'm so thankful that we're doing this as a team and we're doing it together. Don't hesitate to ask any of us for help. Just think of, it's not your kids, but it's taxpayer money. It's really important. Just kidding. But I just wanted to thank Manny for putting everybody together and State Board of Accounts for helping coordinate it. And this should get us brownie points because we're trying, right? It's the effort if you give us the write-ups. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I have nothing amusing to say, so with that, I'll introduce Manny Mendez for the next portion of our
All right. Hi, everyone. I want to first just thank my team members for the build and the time it took to get this together. Support from Microsoft, support from IoT. It's just been a really great effort. This is just the first generation of the risk self-assessment, and it will be advancing over the next few years. So again, staying to the spirit of the FMC, what we're creating is your risk self-assessment. So this is for the agency. And what it's going to do is help fulfill those requirements that's necessary for us to mitigate risk across the enterprise. But for this to be successful, as you've heard from our speakers, you have to be honest to yourself and to the process. So it really requires you to go in, answer the question. The example that I have here, it's the, do you have your process standards documented and are they up to date? It's a simple question, but are they up to date? Go ahead and answer no. And just say, yeah, we are working on it. You know, just to get that activity out there so that we know that this is something that is necessary, needs to be done. And that's where this support line comes from, this information. So the more honest your responses, the better it'll help us develop improved training and stronger activities to, again, mitigate that risk. You're going to have some resources to help you through it. Again, the portal, it's just a tool. So if you put the effort forward, it's going to be a valuable tool. If you just hit yes, maybe not so valuable. But if you put the effort forward, this can really help our enterprise mitigate those risks across. So what we'll also give you is links to the FNCs, to the accounting manuals. You're going to have resources available to you. We even have created a frequently asked questions portal within the portal. So you're going to be able to see the question, ask a question of it, and then between SBA, SBOA, we're going to respond back to you. And we're going to try and do that in about 72 hours or less. So if you have a question about the risk assessment question, we're going to have that means for you to communicate and receive that response. The timeline, today is the day. So we kicked off our summit. We're going to open the portal tomorrow. All the users are going to receive an introduction letter. That's going to come out Friday. It's going to have the link to the assessment. It's going to have a link to a new team site for the agency users. That's going to house the training and any other documentation that you're going to need to complete the risk assessment. So we're going to keep that team site managed. We're going to have the FAQs managed. And we're going to constantly look at opportunities for improving our risk assessment. The deadline for submission is 9/1/22. So let's not do it on 9/2/22. So let's make an effort. It's a very small engagement when you look at it from a big picture. It's 32 questions. We have 13 objectives. And again, they're good basic start questions to look inward into your processes and activities. And what we want to do again is just get that honest feedback from you. Then we're going to create a report out for the users and the agency head so that they can see, here's your 13 objectives, here's how you responded within of those objectives. And then on the back end, that's where SBA and OMB and State Board of Accounts, that's where we're going to accumulate that data and start creating really targeted improvement training opportunities and information for you. So when we look at, again, first generation, this is where we're going to go. It's going to have new processes. This is built on a new platform. It's the Office 365 suite of activities, but this is in the Dataverse. So it's very new to the enterprise. It's been a challenge, but it's been very exciting to see the new tools that are available for us, the security that you can get that you didn't have in a basic SharePoint site. So we're really looking forward to your utilizing this new tool. The users are going to receive a survey. We're going to ask you for your feedback because, again, this is first generation. So your input is going to be so important for us to develop a better process. And we're going to keep, wash, and repeat this effort so that you get the best opportunity to do your risk self-assessment. We know that it's going to be a challenge to get the Microsoft license. It's just part of the process. This is very new to IoT as well. So in an effort to help you get through the risk assessment, I'm going to provide you an Excel sheet with the risk self-assessment questions. It's a very simple sheet. It's drop-down answers. And that way you can start working on your risk self-assessment before you get access to the portal itself. So that way you're not stressing if it maybe takes a month to get you onboarded. I'm hoping it won't. IoT has been making some great efforts to try and speed people along. I loaded 5 agencies today, and all 5 agencies had their Microsoft license, access to the environment. So I know that they're monitoring and really trying to help us out with this, this opportunity. So when we look at, let's see, I've already covered the license, understanding it takes time, we're good there. You're going to get an email notification when you have access. If you do not receive a notification, you are going to get a question from me. I'll be sending an email. Hey, have you received a notification? Can you access the portal? This is just a safeguard that I want to follow through just in case you have access, but the automated notice did not send. And I've found that in our team when I loaded everyone into production, it did not send an email to every person. So I'm going to use that just as a safeguard. So if you get an email from me, we're going to just try and stay on top of that access and get you set into the application. So let's go into the application. I'm going to need to adjust my view here. So I've built this to be very simple, as least amount of clicks as possible so that it can be a very comfortable experience. So when you go into the application, you're going to see a list of agencies. Very simple, you select your agency and it's going to navigate you into the risk self-assessment. You'll see some resources that are available. You can get to those either at the landing page, or you can get to those resources within the application as well. So those are you can go to reference material, you pull up the reference material, copy the URL into your address screen on your Edge or Google, and it'll take you right to that asset. And then frequently asked question responses. So this is where you guys all may have the same question. Well, don't resend the question. Go take a look in the frequently asked questions list. It's a drop down, and it's going to ask you what question are you curious about or have a concern or question about. and you'll be able to see other people's responses, or you'll see our responses to other people's questions. So I've color coded everything to the topic. So your objectives are in tan, your questions are in light blue, and then where you put your responses are in light green. So very visual in the segregation: objective, question, response. This is the actual risk self-assessment. In this generation, it's a little crowded, but it seems to meet what we need. And I'm going to break this sheet down into its parts. But basically, you can see there's the question, there's the objective, there's your area to respond, there's how you're going to click respond. A safeguard in yellow, that's your agency. Just in case you happen to select the wrong agency, always verify that you're in your agency when you start answering the questions. So, very simple, drop-down box. Yes, no, not sure, NA. Real simple. If you answer no, not sure, or NA, please put a brief explanation of why. Again, in the example I had brought in, what if your procedures are not up to date? Well, go ahead and answer no. Yes, we have them, but they're not up to date. It's just a good assessment, and it's honest. When you look at, let's see, the comments field, you've got about, I think it's 25 lines to put in. I'll be curious to see if you guys can fill 25 lines, or if I need to go larger, or if I can go smaller. So on the survey, that's going to be one of the questions. Did you have adequate space to put your comments in? But that is really, that's it. It's really that simple. And then this first generation, again, to the point, answer the question, and then we're going to provide you your overall risk for your agency. When you answer the question, and this is really important, is that you do your drop down, you enter your comments, and then you post your response. You have to do that on every question. And that's really important. So if you make the selection, go to the next answer or the next question, it will not post. It'll stay whatever you selected, but it will not post it in the back end. It also will not change the counter that you'll see in just a minute. And what you're going to get as a confirmation, you'll see the button disappear, and then you'll see the opportunity for complete, and then reset the question. This generation, I wanted to give everybody an out. Normally you answer the question, the button disappears. I wanted to give you guys that opportunity to go, oh, wait a minute, I should have answered it this way. So you can answer the question, post it, come back later, you can always change your answer. So you're not locked in. You see the counter on top, 34 questions. Every time you hit that post response, that counter is going to start clicking up. Total of 34 questions, total answered 33. When you hit 34, there's going to be a button that flashes up. You can see in the middle there, it says you have completed your risk self-assessment. Press this button to submit. What'll happen is you're going to first get an email that says you have completed your risk self-assessment. I'm going to get an email that says you've completed your risk self-assessment. And in 3 days, I'll remove you from the lineup, from the agency dropdown that you saw at on the landing page. But I want to give you time to go, wait a minute, you know what? I think I better go back. So I'm going to give everybody about 3 days after you hit submit, and then I'll move you out of prod. It'll just do another clock. You go in and when you reset, you'll see the button disappear. But when you hit 34 again, the button will come back up to submit. Oh, yeah. No, we will work with you. Again, this isn't meant. Enough. This isn't a gotcha. This is, I'm gonna help you. But we want to work with everyone. And this is the first time I've built something this elaborate in a new tool that's not in the environment yet. I mean, this is just starting to roll out to the enterprise. So you may discover something, hey, Manny, we really need this. I'm going to endeavor to get just what you want. You know, again, it's a tool. I'm going to make it the best I can, but I need your input for it to become the best. And I'm really looking forward to your honest feedback. I've got thick skin, I can take a punch. So be honest with your feedback. So then we go into, let's see, reference material. This is one that I know in next generation I'll be able to advance, but for now I had to go with basic use and functionality. Again, you'll be able to see the question. From the question, you'll see a list of resources. Copy the URL, put it in your address. That resource. That way, if you have a question, you know, you're concerned, question, and what it's really meaning. So I told you about posting a question and looking at if someone else asked that same question. How to post a question first, or do I show you? I went with, let me show you where the questions are. All you do is grab the drop-down box. All the questions are listed, all 34. Select your question that you have a question about. And what it's going to do is you'll be able to see SBA OB's response. Post a new question, you'll find it. But if your question's not there, then you can post a question. Very simple. Put your agency. You can put your ACRO or spell it out. It's your preference. The POC, where it's auto capture. Then you, again, from a drop-down, select post free text, your question, hit submit. It's send the question to the team, and the team's going to endeavor to respond to you in 72 questions they get. End of game. After 34 questions answered, we're going to be looking at presenting to you at your final report out. Very basic risk assessment questions. They range from a 4. We'll take that total, put you into the populace of where you land by the severity of. We'll also be providing reporting by topic, so that objective, what your score was on those questions. Really exciting time. Really know their stuff. So what we're going to do for the next steps, we're going to finalize the user logins. Some of you may have access out to the first 5 agencies. That'll go out first thing in the morning. And I'm going to ask them, hey, just go in and see if you can. And if you can, awesome. If you can't, I know. But IoT's the introduction letter is going to go out Friday. Application is going to open up 7:15. RSA due by 9/1, and then final report outs will come 9/23. Any questions? Hey. Hey, what's up? That also resolves your question. Can I be able to see your response? Output, the report itself is not part. Gee, here's what. Generation I don't have. That in the first generation. If you want to circulate it around. But in the survey, I'd really like to have the ability. The questions. Go ahead.
For agencies, that's something IoT is going to hire to our security.
And I'll How many are not on the IN. You're going to be receiving an email. I don't have a means of getting. You're still going to get the same. I appreciate your time.
All right, here, next on the agenda, we can either do some trust falls or some icebreakers or do like a 20-minute break, give you a chance to hit the restroom and return some emails. What's everybody want to do? Trust falls? Rest, okay, we'll do the break. It is, I have 2:05, so we will reconvene at 2:25. Thanks.
Wait till you hear Patrick's presentation. We've spoken a few times, I've never. I'm gonna interrupt you. I'm just gonna introduce myself. Jason Reeves, we spoke in the front a couple times, but.
Yeah, Patrick Price.
Yeah, nice to meet you. So, thank you, we get a few minutes here. So our legislative liaison typically be saying the principle. Whoever uses line from your agency. So one of the things that NDOT is very concerned about with the whole, not so much the risk exercise, but where the risk collection could go. Is protecting the data from Apple, those are things that we talked about. So we're actually, Andrew's going to be working on maybe trying to get a proposal. Are you already aware of that process? Or?
No,
Okay.
but I can tell you, we do.
Okay.
Have raised this issue.
Yeah, great.
This week, my
Yeah.
Yeah. Raised it.
Yeah.
So that.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I put together a case for it from my perspective. So she has that, and she's reaching out to have further discussions. And yeah, I think it's certainly this. The overall feel of what we're trying to acquire. I think we have some protection, otherwise we're ourselves up. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay. There appeared to be some thrilling conversations in the back about risk management, but I'll ask you to save that until the end. Before Auditor Klutz stepped out, she asked me to handle one thing for her, and I forgot. But she wanted me to recognize Kim Diller. Kim's been with the auditor's office in a different capacity, but has recently stepped into the role. Or are you still wearing your old hat and the new hat, or just okay? So she is wearing a few different hats now at the auditor's office, but essentially the new one taking over with Clay's departure on June 30th. Which, can I say, for a person to be in state government in a financial role, to leave on June 30th, even if it's a Thursday, going out at the end of the fiscal year, I kind of I'm impressed by that. But can we remind me of your new title? Okay, so Director of Accounting Reporting, and still handling the local government distribution. So anyway, Auditor Klutz wanted me to introduce or reintroduce you all to Kim Diller. And so our next speaker today, hailing from parts unknown, weighing in at 195 pounds and 6'2", it's my pleasure to introduce SBA General Counsel, Patrick Price. Thank you.
Yes, sadly, I'm impressed. I'm confused. Are you like a carnival barker or something? Yeah. Thank you all very much for being here. So I am the general counsel of SBA. And I don't know if you all have heard the story about the lawyer who was asked to present at the financial conference. He was given all the boring stuff to make everyone else look exciting. So I'm going to do an overview of the financial management circulars, which are state budgets, OMBs. These are our kind of overarching financial directions to agencies. We have our authority up there to do this. We undertook a major project to reorganize them, get rid of the old system where you had to know the year it was issued and the order, and we've grouped them thematically, so hopefully it's easier to find things and understand what the requirements are. So this year we rolled out 3 new FMCs, 6.1 on internal controls, 6.2 on the risk assessment, and 6.3 on internal audit. And before I get into them, I want to ask first, how many people had heard or knew what internal controls were before these FMCs came out? All right, all the hands. How many people's agencies had a system of internal controls in place prior to these FMCs? Still pretty good. How many agencies had a designated person responsible for internal controls? Okay. How many agencies did an annual risk assessment? Okay, we're getting about a quarter. And then how many did internal audits? Okay, about the same number. So, I want to reiterate and highlight some things that that Paul and Chris and others have said. These FMCs are one step in the process. They're not the end. We're marching along the path, and as Paul Joyce indicated, this has been a long-standing project for him and Chris Johnston. In terms of these specific FMCs, we actually started meeting as a working group in early 2020, and then COVID hit. But we tried to make it a collaborative process. So there was state budget, the auditor's office, state board of accounts, and then representatives of the 3 statutory internal audit agencies. So DOR, FSSA, and BMV. And then we sent out the FMCs before they're finalized and got lots of feedback. I know like NDOT and IDEM in particular sent back some very helpful feedback on these. So we've tried to make this a very collaborative process. And as Chris talked about, that's the goal going forward as well, to help, bring the people with knowledge together and learn from each other. So going to first, 6.1, this requires all agencies to establish effective systems of internal controls. I'm not going to read to you the introduction, but as Chris talked about, one of our responsibilities as people in government is to be stewards and safeguards of public funds. And confidence in the government is directly tied to how well we administer our programs. And as people in management and in financial management in particular, internal controls, risk assessment, internal audit, these are your friends. These are the tools that we implement to provide those assurance and those safeguards. And one of our goals of this project was to try to move from being reactive to being proactive. And Manny and Paul and others have talked about the importance of taking this seriously and being honest, because that is the goal, to identify our weaknesses and then proactively address them. And it's a little bit of my background. I've worked with FSSA when I was in private practice, defending them in the IBM lawsuit. And then I went to BMV where they were being sued for fee overcharges, and then went to DOR, where, for those of you that remember, they kind of lost track of about $500 million. In all 3 of those cases, there was significant loss of confidence and trust in the agency. And beyond that, for the people in the agency, it wasn't any fun. And you can talk to them, like you can talk to Paul, you can talk to Ed. Those of you who knew Harold Day before, you're under the microscope. Everybody's looking at what you're doing. Everything you do is under scrutiny. Everything becomes a lot harder. And I think in response to those 3 things was why those agencies were picked for internal audit, is to try to be proactive and prevent repeats. So high level, what these FMCs do, and particularly internal controls. This does establish a framework. So this is the high level framework. If you want to know more about internal controls, there's lots of information out there. State Board of Accounts has a fantastic internal control manual you can reference. You can go to COSO standards, which largely influence this. There's lots of reading. This FMC is not a comprehensive discussion of internal controls. It also does not prescribe a one-size-fits-all model of specific controls. Our agencies are very different. What DOR needs is very different than NDOT. It's very different than BMV, very different than DNR. Agencies are different. The internal controls they need are different. And then the agency's development of their internal controls is a function of management's judgment based on the needs, the services, the functions that the agency performs. We've talked about the 5 elements of internal controls. Paul Joyce hit on this. These are standard 5 elements. You can go to the COSO factors. These are the same 5 elements. And not going to get into them too much. I will say that the control environment, that's very important, and that starts at the top. This includes like the tone from the top, the commitment to ethics, the commitment to integrity, the hiring the right people. This is where we as financial people in the state play an important role in setting that tone in the control environment. And then these other items are what's covered in the FMCs. So why are we doing this? What is the goal of a system of internal controls? First, we want to make sure that the resources are used efficiently and in compliance with the laws. Again, this is kind of our basic responsibility as stewards of public funds. We want to safeguard transactions, prevent fraud. We want to make sure that the financial transactions that we perform are recorded and reported properly. And we also want to ensure proper management of funds held outside the state. Are they being properly used? Are they being properly managed? So when you're designing your system of internal controls for the agency, what are the things that you're looking at ensuring? Are transactions authorized? And we've talked about the purchasers and receivers. If you don't purchase things, that's not something you need. If you purchase it, it is. If you're in DOT and you have lots of equipment, you're going to need a lot more controls over that than an agency which doesn't. Accounting records are properly designed. This can be very big for an agency like Department of Revenue, which has extensive financial reports the state relies on. We need to make sure that those are accurate. Assets are secured, recorded, and reconciled. Duties are segregated. Financial data is analyzed. Activities are monitored. Documents are preserved. And it's important, we mention this in the FMC, and this is kind of a theme throughout internal controls, is that there needs to be a dynamic cost-benefit analysis of the controls. You can have an infinite level of control if you want, which also carries with it infinite cost. So part of the management's judgment is evaluating which controls are cost-effective given the roles and responsibilities of your agency. There are some basic minimum standards for internal controls. Segregation of duties. That's been hit on several times. Limit of access to assets to people that need to have them. We have to have policies and procedures that provide compliance with laws. And as Manny talked about, those policies and procedures need to be updated. If you have policies and procedures from 1980 that haven't been looked at, probably not an effective internal control. We need to have qualified staff. This gets into the hiring process. Are we hiring the right types of people and putting them into the right types of roles? And then very critical is that there's an internal review of your internal controls. It's a dynamic process. Again, it's not we set something up in 1980 and yay us. It's, each year we go back and look, are our internal controls adequate? What do we need to change? What do we need to add? What can we drop? Management has some very specific responsibilities under our financial management circular. Agency heads are responsible for establishing, implementing, and maintaining the system of internal controls. They're also responsible for documenting internal controls and communicating those requirements to staff. And they are responsible for ensuring that all of their staff are trained on the internal controls. As financial individuals, you're probably going to lean on very heavily for all four of those tasks. And then management of an agency generally is responsible for assessing and strengthening the internal controls to minimize fraud, waste, and abuse. Again, it's a dynamic, responsive process, identifying the risk in your control environment and addressing them. So again, we need to evaluate our system of internal controls on an ongoing basis and train new staff on internal controls as they come in. In terms of deliverables, and this is very important, when the agency head submits their budget submission, they need to sign the certification form that's included with the FMC. It includes certifications that the agency's internal controls comply with the requirements of the FMC, that all personnel are trained on the internal controls, and that there are no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that have been identified. And we recognize that this FMC just came out. And a lot of you will be submitting these shortly. And you probably haven't done these things, or at least all of them, and that's okay. This is part of the process of, setting the baseline, understanding where we are, and where we need to focus resources. As Manny and Chris and Tara and others have said, this isn't a gotcha exercise. And being honest and forthcoming is where the value is. The other important thing to keep in mind is if your agency needs to submit a corrective action plan based on an SBOA audit finding or a federal audit finding, you need to submit that to your budget analyst first for approval by OMB and state budget prior to submitting that to SBOA or the federal entity. And this is a variety of reasons, but it's important for us to be aware of what those findings are and work with the agency on the corrective action plan. But then we're also going to be tracking those findings and tracking progress on the corrective action plans. Are there any questions on 6.1? Yes. Chris is smiling, and you can ask him that too. I think our plan is we recognize this year, this FMC just came out. And we recognize that a lot of agencies may not have been implementing internal controls fully prior to this, or may not have had them documented in the way that we need. And so that's very recognized. I think if you don't have it in place, say, no, we don't. We are working on putting them in place in compliance with the FMC. And, again, it's okay. It's better to be honest than to say, oh yeah, no, totally, we've got all these things in place. And then we find out from SBOA that actually you don't. Or we find out by reading the Indianapolis Star, whatever it may be. So it's okay to say no on this round. Be honest. Great question. Great question. I think you're a plant. Jason, can I talk about your proposal? So we have gotten a number of questions about this. Are the in particular, are the risk assessments, more importantly, are they public documents? I think with a lot of these things, our position right now is that these are deliberative intra-agency communications. They're statements of opinion for the purpose of decision-making. So they should be excluded. I think that, NDOT in particular is very concerned about this, as are some other agencies, and people are discussing potentially exploring a legislative amendment to access to public records to make it explicit that the risk assessments are excluded. My personal opinion is I think they're covered by the deliberative process privilege. Questions? Hopefully that means everyone's asleep and I can fly through. All right, agency risk assessments. This is 6.2. This is, Manny has already gotten up and described the risk self-assessment that we are putting in place now. Ideally, as we go forward, each agency is going to be doing a more tailored risk assessment to themselves. Because, again, NDOT has a lot of equipment. DOR does a lot of financial transactions. DNR has a lot of property. Agencies have very different responsibilities and roles. And, it's important that your risk assessment is tailored to what your agency does. So in the FMC, effective July 1, all state agencies must conduct an annual formal risk assessment that evaluates the probability of occurrence and the likelihood of financial, managerial compliance and reputational risk and of risk related to the use of information technology. It's pretty broad. And the risk assessment we put in place is the first step in going down there. You know, items of risk, and again, we have 34 questions this year. So like, this is the baby step. But, you know, as you're looking at your agency, do you have equipment? Do you handle federal funds? Do you handle cash? Do you give out grants? Do you have high agency turnover? Are there risk of new legislation? Is there a risk of a recession or some external event that could disrupt you? NDOT probably has a concern about rising fuel cost. That could very well impact your agency's ability to carry out its responsibilities. So there are a variety of things that can go into this risk assessment. And then risks are ranked according to the probability of occurrence and the likely effect of the risk evaluated. And Manny in his presentation showed you that kind of heat chart with the white, the yellow, and the red, ranked by kind of severity versus likelihood. Highly likely severe risk are red, probably want to focus your attention there. Unlikely risk with low probability, less of a concern. But this is a tool for management to help you understand where the agency needs to focus its attention and where it should be proactive. So risk is the possibility that an event will occur and adversely affect the achievement of objectives. So again, you know, like risk can be, what's the likelihood of a recession? What's the likelihood of high gas prices? What's the likelihood of not being able to hire IT staff? What's the likelihood that the General Assembly is going to totally rewrite your code and change everything you have to do? What's the likelihood that you know, you haven't written down your procedures and people forget where transactions are recorded and you lose track of $500 million? I mean, range of issues there. The required steps, and this part is very important, as you know, as we're looking forward to kind of the individualized agency risk assessments. It's important that management first defines what are your agency objectives, and that it's very important that those objectives are defined clearly, because then the risk assessment flows from there. Because once you've defined your objectives, you're identifying what are the risks that might prevent your agency from achieving those objectives. You need to consider the potential for fraud when you're identifying your potential risk. And then you need to identify, analyze, and respond to significant changes that could impact your internal control environment. You know, as we look at this, what are some of the areas that can be impacted? Operations, the effectiveness and efficiency of your operations, reporting, the accuracy of the information that you're providing, or compliance. Are you going to become out of compliance with laws? And then, you know, once you've identified the risk, analyze it. This is part of the scoring. What's the likelihood? What's the impact? And then responding. And responding can be, you know, we've added a new internal control. We've added a new procedure. We've added training. We've hired new staff. We've documented our procedures. And you know, it could be including like we accept this risk. That it's a low probability risk with a low impact. The cost effectiveness of putting in a control is not there. We're just going to accept this risk. But it's that process of identifying it, analyzing it, and then identifying the management response to what you found. In terms of fraudulent activities, there are some required reporting. Agencies must report misappropriation of funds to OMB, SBOA, and the Inspector General or the prosecuting attorney. We've laid this out in the FMC. Some of these are contained in other parts of statute. And then in terms of separate from fraud, which those are the required reportings for fraud, for material variances, losses, shortages, or thefts, these need to be reported to OMB and SBOA. Materiality varies by an agency. And materiality, the standards for that are set out in SBOA's Examiner Directive 2015-6. So if you have questions about materiality, you can look there. Again, using some of our examples, something that's material to DOR or something that's material to IPSC, small agency of a handful of people and not a large budget, could very well not be material to DOR, which handles 18 billion in taxes. So materiality varies by the size of the agency, the scope of what it does. In terms of the deliverable, the agency shall submit the annual risk assessment to the director of OMB by September 1st of each even-numbered year. The risk assessment that Manny discussed is the one for this year. Going forward, what we're going to be asking agencies to do is to identify their top 3 risks, along with their proposed plans to mitigate or eliminate each risk. And then we're also going to be talking about as part of this process, the audit findings from SBOA and federal auditors, and the mitigation efforts on those or remediation efforts. And then I'm going to be asking for progress reports on the mitigation of the prior top risk that had been reported. Questions? I was about to change. It's a good question. Chris, do you want to know more? All right, our last one, the internal audit FMC. I think Chris said this is a developing project where we want to get the relevant agencies together and be identifying best practices. The effective date of this FMC is next July. And it applies to a state agency that has an annual operating budget greater than 10 million, more than 100 FTEs, or receives and processes more than $10 million in cash in a fiscal year. The internal audit requirements are that the agency needs to have an audit plan that includes periodic audits of major systems and controls. These audits should include sample testing of revenue and expenditure transactions, procurements, grants and contracts, and federal grants. Obviously, the sample testing is to ensure that the controls that are identified and put in place are being implemented consistent with their design. The audit also needs to include a review of the data processing systems, your IT systems, and the like. The standards for the internal audit, they need to comply with the standards for the professional practice of internal auditing. And the code of ethics contained in the professional practices framework is promulgated by the Institute of Internal Auditors. They also need to comply with generally accepted government auditing standards. There are some basic standards for internal audit that we have identified, including that the head of internal audit has a direct or indirect, or I'm sorry, direct or dotted line reporting to the agency head or an audit committee that's approved by OMB. I know some agencies have an audit committee. Also very important, the head of the internal audit needs to have free access and unrestricted access to senior management and any outside auditors for the agency. Essentially, they need to be able to have access to the information they need to perform an accurate audit. And the head of internal audit and the audit personnel must be free of operational and management responsibilities. So you can't have internal audit performing financial transactions, for example, and then doing an internal audit of the financial transactions that they're responsible for. They need to be independent of operations. And then, you know, tied in with the access to senior management, internal audit needs to have free and unrestricted access to any and all records, physical properties and personnel relevant. You know, this doesn't necessarily mean they can show up at any time, and obviously they work with your agency so that it's not EOR, they're not taking everybody off processing tax returns right before April 15th. But they need to be able to have access to those records and to those personnel. And then internal audit needs to be able to have an independent and objective mental attitude. And this is very important. If they're just cheerleading for the agency, they're not doing taxpayers any favors. They're not doing agency management any favors. I mean, the goal of this function is to objectively look at your agency, identify the weaknesses in your controls, identify the risk, and highlight areas for management attention and focus. And, you know, Auditor Klutz was talking about, they just assume that time's being reported right, or that transactions are being reported right. Well, internal audit's the one that's going to go in there and tell you, no, we have a deficiency there. And it's better to find that out internally and address it than to have it reported on the front page of the Star and a federal audit. Deliverables are an annual audit report that's due September 1st. This corresponds with the reporting deadline for the 3 statutory agencies, DOR, FSSA, and BMV. And, you know, we've asked agencies to evaluate that are subject to this FMC to evaluate their staffing and their needs for a potential change package to be included with their 2023 budget submission. Questions? Awesome, you're done with the lawyer. Thank you. Zach?
All right, thank you, Patrick. That was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, let's see. I think next up, are we due for, we're due for State Board of Accounts? Yes. So it's our musical guest, Debbie Gibson. Is that right? Okay, all right. All right.
Yes, I don't think anybody wants me to sing. I am really tone deaf, and it might be kind of amusing to know that we also used to have a Charlie Pride that worked for us as well. So everybody would try to get us together, and no, it didn't work. So good afternoon. It's really good to see all of you today. I am Debbie Gibson. And this is going to kind of go along with what Paul was saying earlier about how that he was very, very supportive of this. we have created a new division in our agency that is called State Non-Audit Services. And that's specifically so that you know that we are not here from the audit perspective, though we will bring you that audit perspective, but we're not here to audit you. Myself, Susan Gordon, stand up, Susan. And Abby Parker in the back. I think many of you know Abby because she has recently been on the ACFR audit. Susan and myself have audited in the past on state agencies, but it's been several years. We've recently been with local units of government in training them and providing advisory and technical services to them. And that's what we wanted to bring to you as well. So one thing with the FMCs is that it's going to reference the accounting manual a lot. And I'm going to ask the question, how many of you know about the accounting manual from the state? Very good. So its full name is the Accounting and Uniform Compliance Guidelines Manuals for State and Quasi Agencies, which is a mouthful, and that's why we just call it the Accounting Manual. And by statute, State Board of Accounts is supposed to establish writing guidelines that we examine and report against. So depending on the type of audit, we'll use other kinds of guidelines such as federal compliance or then the standards as put forth by assertions and things like that. But the basic foundation for financial activities can be found in this manual, the accounting processes for the state, internal controls on chapter 2, along with our other manual that Patrick was brought up. Accounting for revenues, expenditures, you name it, when it comes to financial accountability, it's in this manual. And I want to show it to you though too, because it kind of surprised me. It sounds like a whole bunch, but it's not as thick as you think. So if you're ever bored at night and you just want to read through a little bit, be my guest. Yes. So as I was saying, the FMC is going to be referring, I mean, not the FMC, the risk management self-assessment that you're going to be doing. It does reference our manual quite a bit. It will reference over to our website, but some of you may already be using through the SharePoint library. And please feel free to go ahead and use that if that's what you're already doing for a reference point, because it is the same manual. And since the first stage of the risk assessment is on financial activity, and again, the SBOA accounting manual provides the basic guidance and foundation for these. You will be referencing it a lot. It is going to be focusing quite a bit on chapter 4, which is receipts, and chapter 6, which is expenditures, but it is going to be particularly in use when it comes to those of you who have SDO accounts. I know you've heard this like a zillion times today already. This does not mean that your answers should be matching what is in the accounting manual. Your answers should be what is happening in your agency. But the accounting manual will provide you with what expectations are for a given question so that you will know, have a foundation if it's a yes or a no, or I'm not sure after I read the manual on that part, I don't know, that's fine. For an example, on question 21, it says the duties of collecting monies, processing the receipt, license, permit, etc., preparing and making deposits, maintaining accounts, receivable records, issuing billings, and performing reconciliations are segregated. Okay, so it will reference in our manual, chapter 4, which gives the basic authority for that and our expectation for that. But if you're not certain what segregation of duties, would this be a segregation of duty or not, then you can go to chapter 2 of the manual, and it actually on chapter 2 on page 9, I believe it is, it talks about the various processes. So if you're not sure that you meet it, again, just document that. If you are like, no way, we are not big enough to have those kinds of segregation, please document that. Document what your staff is doing. There could be those mitigations that are going on. And please don't get frustrated. If you just don't know how to approach or have a specific question, ask. This tool is for you and to get to know your agency. And we know that some of the questions could be taken maybe some different ways. So by all means, the Q&A that's in the risk assessment tool, please go ahead and utilize that. We are all going to be here from SBA, SBOA, Auditor State. We are all here to help you on this. And again, I am so excited that we're looking at things from a statewide perspective as well. One of the things that Paul wants SBOA to be much more involved in is training for state agencies. This will give us focus on where that you need the training at. We also will be providing something that we've been doing at local government units for a long time, and that's called bulletin articles. And this will provide when there's a need for some clarification or specific questions that are being asked. And this will give us a method quarterly to provide you that information. So we're really excited to bring that about for you. Again, I think this is a great opportunity for everyone involved. And if you have any questions, not just about the risk assessment, but I do have mine and Susan's and Abby's contact information. But if you have something that's outside of the risk assessment and you just want to talk about it, ask, okay, what'll happen when you guys come in and audit? Is there, some way we can head off this problem that we've been having? Contact us and we will be happy to work with you on that. So anybody have any questions or anything? Okay, well, I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Are you not going to talk today, Lisa? I had this big intro ready for you. Okay, I'll save it for later. All right, looks like we're back to Manny for a little bit, and we'll finish up with some Q&A in a little bit. Thanks.
All righty, so this is just a teaser. Not a lot of content in slides, but it's going to be a new process for the tracking or updates on the So OMB wanted to develop a means for you to provide input about your single audit findings and others. You don't have to respond to the Fed on your. We're still going to be asking for you to provide statuses on your management. So we need OMB's requirements. So it's an easy follow-up process. Agencies will update every 90 days. And that information all going to be housed in a. I'm going to just run through the slides really quickly. Still doing some development. So this may change, so don't fall in love with how pretty it is now. But like the risk process when it comes to. So again, you start with selection of your agency. Then what's going to be populated, and you do not have to populate this. I have the means of onboarding all the risks, all the management letters from SBOA. So you'll select your item, and it navigates into a 3-tab view. Are the finding detail, have repeat finding. It could be a very general block of information. It's just not very specific into the detail, like you're finding for this year, for the 2020. But we're just going to ask you to just let us know what's happening with those repeat findings. Then we're going to go specifically to the finding. So within the finding, you're going to have elements of what you're supposed to fix. So in this example, we have cash management, we have period of performance, and the SOP. Those were findings within the one major. All you do is place your status. Started, in process, and a date. You're going to provide your updates in a granular form. And it's also going to append your comments about where you're saving it or what I said the last time I did an update. It's a very simple process and a very centralized communication. OMB will have the ability to send you messages going to you in an email. You'll be able to put your input right. You don't have to have the Microsoft license. But just a teaser, very easy. When the final audit comes out, I'll have a quick off email. We may even have add your documents. Check off what documents you've loaded into the portal. All centralized. You got version retention. So right now, next steps, we're going to be finalizing the development of the portal. There's still some activities that then the 20 single audits complete. When that's a load, and then we'll have a kickoff with the agency. It's not available now. Until the audit is complete, I can't look. So I have 2020 audit information in this. So in the drop down of the agency, right now, if you select the agency, you're gonna have. But with that said, by the traveling in the SharePoint world and the advanced. There's some cool gadgets and. Until they get adapted by the gov, we limit that access. Will be a means that is. Other questions? And this is just the teaser for becoming. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you, Manny, and thank you to all of our speakers and presenters today. We are a little bit ahead of where we thought we'd be schedule-wise, so we have plenty of time for questions if there's anything, any questions for any of our speakers or panelists today. Not everybody at once. Yeah, go for it.
So the findings regarding this. Federal audits and other audits that may apply to our agency, because they eventually expand this. I don't see, but there are other ancillary audits that are applied in different areas.
Anybody else? All right. Well, again, I just on behalf of all the offices and presenters today, really appreciate your time and attention today. I think Manny and I were kind of talking during the break, and you know, we're so not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we're just so thrilled with the progress we're making in some of these areas and all the kind of long overdue improvements that we're making in state government, and just appreciate all of your hard work and all of your support. As many of you know, or maybe as some of you know, tomorrow we're going to be announcing at 11:30 we'll have a press conference to announce the results for the end of fiscal year 22, and we'll unveil that surplus statement. And you know, just think about where we were a couple of years ago, whenever the pandemic was first upon us, and there were so many shutdowns, and we were literally bracing for a $3 billion impact to the general fund. You know, not knowing exactly what time frame we were looking at, but just what if we lose $3 billion of general fund revenue over a short confined period of time. And as you'll see tomorrow in the results, wow, we are just unprecedented. Doesn't even begin to describe kind of where we are, especially given where we thought we were going to be just a few years ago. But a lot of that is due to, you know, your diligent work, hard work at agencies, your attention to detail, and it does not go unnoticed, and we appreciate everything you do. So with that, Chris, any other closing remarks you want to make? So, okay, well, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.